Good evening. Hope everyone is doing well. Mazel tov again to all the assignment of Maseches Shkolim. Baruch Hashem, we're starting a new Masechta back into the Bavli world, and we're learning Maseches Yoma, which speaks about the Yom. A Yom is a reference to, of course, Yom Kippur. So today we're going to learn about a din in a Mishnah that was specific to Yom Kippur. It was a preparatory halacha that we would separate out the Kohen Gadol from his family life, from his whole world, for 7 days prior to Yom Kippur to make sure that he was going to be tahor. So we are right now starting the new Mishnah, Beis Amud Aleph. Let's get started. Says the Mishnah as follows: Shiva Yamim Kodem Yom Kippurim, 7 days before Yom Kippur was to begin. Mafrishin Kohen Gadol mi Beiso Lishkash Parhedrin. The Kohen Gadol was removed and separated from his house, and he would go to a room in the Beis Hamikdash referred to as the Lishkas Parhedrin. Umaskinim lo Kohen Achar Tachtov Shema Psul. And they also had a backup. Right, they had someone in the bullpen just to make sure that in the event that there was a psul in this kohen, or if the night before he saw zera, whatever the case may become a balkari, just in case he became a puzzle. So the halacha was they had a backup for him. So they separated him and the chor. They separated another kohen as well. And Rabbi Yehuda Omer af isha acheres maskinan lo. They also prepared that there should be another wife. Second wife, a backup wife. Why? What's going on here? Says the Mishnah, Shema Tamus Ishto, because God forbid his current wife should die, and then says the pasuk that he has to have a wife. Shenemar v'chiper ba'ado uve'ad beiso, that it will be a kapara for him and his house. And this is a famous drasha that's used out of context regularly. Beiso zo ishto. This is a reference to him having a wife. So if the pasuk says that the Kohen Gadol can generate kapara for him and his household is a reference to his wife, then the chori has to have a wife. So that's the shita of the Tanakama. Last few words of the Mishnah, Beis Amud Aleph, Amru lo im kenem l'davar sof. If your concern is that maybe he'll become a puzzle, and then maybe his wife will die, so then how do you know when to stop scaling out? Like it's a never-ending cycle of concern. So l'chora, if we just learn this Mishnah right at face value, it would seem that he doesn't agree that we need to separate out another Kohen Gadol and another wife. That's what it seems from the Gemara. From the Mishnah, we'll analyze this another time, not today. The Gemara opens. What? No wonder everyone wanted to do that. Maybe. It says the Mishnah, Tanan Hassam, we have a Mishnah over there, and as I mentioned right before Daf Yomi, the words Tanan Hassam were some of the most comforting words I've heard in a very long time. Big fan. Shiva, what? Yeah, Taninan Taman. Says the Gemara as follows. Tanan Hassam, we have a Mishnah elsewhere that reads as follows. Shiva Yamim Kodem Sreifa Sapara, Ahim Afrishin Kohen Asar Vesapar Mi Beso Lishka Shalf Nehabira. A similar din. Just like in our Mishnah, where we have a Kohen Gadol who's separated from his family 7 days prior to the Yom Kippur, seemingly, the Mishnah writes, that we have the same din by Para Aduma. And we're going to spend the day today comparing these two worlds of Para Aduma and Yom Kippur, in that both of them have a requirement that the Kohen who's going to do that avoda, be it the avoda of Yom Kippur or the Para Aduma, that they have to be mafresh from their world 7 days prior. And this particular one, in the case of Para Aduma, he was put l'lishkash al panei habira. We'll see what this means in the Gemara soon. Tzafona mizracha, northeast, on the northeast side of the Mishkan, the Lishkas Beis Ha'even Haisa Nikres, and the name of it was Lishkas Beis Ha'even. So again, the Kohen who was going to do the avoda of the Para Aduma would be brought to the Beis Hamikdash, to this room called Beis Ha'even. Now, why was it called that way? V'lama nikra Shema Lishkas Beis Ha'even. Why was this room called the house of Beis Ha'even? Answers the Gemara. Shekain ma'aseha bekli galalim, bekli avanim, uvekli adama. Because all of the kelim that were made out of kli galalim. It was made from the fecal matter of animals, the kli avanim, or made from stones, the kli adama. So it's called lishkas beis ha'even because it was made from these things that were made from earth. My taima. What was the reason why all of the kelim that were here were made out of earth? So answers the Gemara, seemingly something totally out of left field, and we'll come back to some context momentarily. My taima answers the Gemara because kevan de tvul yom kasher bepara. What does that have to do with anything? A tvul yom is a person who was tameh. He went to the mikvah, but in order for him to become fully tahor, he has to wait until the sun sets. So between the time he goes to the mikvah and the time the sun sets, he's referred to as the tvul yom. And the halacha is that a kohen who is a tvul yom is allowed, yes, in the affirmative, is allowed to do the avoda of the para aduma. What does that have to do with anything? So therefore, he was put into the lishka that was called Beis Even. What does that have to do with anything? It says the Gemara, let's give some context, third of the way down, Beis Amud Aleph, Ditnan. Because the Mishnah writes, Mitamin hayu hakohen asarif esapara. They would intentionally make the Kohen Tameh, albeit derabanan. They would induce Tuma derabanan for the Kohen who was going to be doing the avod of the Para Aduma, Umad Bilan Oso, and then they'd send him to the mikvah, but they wouldn't wait until nightfall to do the streif of the Para Aduma. And what they would do is Umat Bilan Oso lahosimi liban shel tzedukim, because the tzedukim were of the opinion that the Kohen who did the avod of the Para Aduma required ha'erev shemesh. That a Tvul Yom, who had a status of still being semi-tameh, he was not allowed to do the avod of the Para Aduma. That was the tzedukim. Those they were not makabel the Torah Shabbat Peh. So the tzedukim held shayu omrim be'me'orvei hashemesh haisanases. The only kohanim that could do the avod of the Para Aduma were the ones who had achieved ha'erev shemesh. Once the sun set, they go to the mikvah at 9 a.m. The sun doesn't set until 8 p.m. During that time, from 9 a.m. to 8 p.m., he's considered a Tvul Yom. So the tzedukim said that the person who does the Para Aduma, he can only do the avoda after the sun sets. But halacha l'maisa, that's not how we paskin. They're wrong. The tzedukim are wrong. The prushim are right. What did the prushim say? That even a Tvul Yom could do this. And then takinu la rabbanan klei galalim klei avanim v'klei adama. So then what they did is they made all of the kalim that were used for Para Aduma, they'd make them out of earthenware so that they could not be makabel tuma, delo l'kabel tuma. So it's a sophisticated situation. Here's what happened. The halacha is ladina, that a Kohen who is a Tvul Yom, he went to the mikvah at 9 a.m. He won't achieve full tahara until 8 p.m. During the day at noon, he can do the avoda of the Para Aduma, totally mutter, even though he's a Tvul Yom, which has a status of tuma.
He's coming again.
What?
He's going to be coming again for doing the Para Aduma.
Oh, right, but that's okay. But that's built in. That's the nature of the din, is that whoever's matayr is matayr. You're absolutely right. But what they wanted to do is they wanted to make sure that nobody misunderstood what the tzdukim were saying. The tzdukim, against the halacha that we know, the tzdukim said, you guys are wrong. A Tvul Yom is not allowed to do the avoda, only if he's achieved ha'erev shemesh. So he's not allowed to do the Para Aduma today at 12. He has to wait until the sun sets at 8, and then he can do the Para Aduma. So we don't paskin that way. So in order to show that the tzdukim were wrong, now this gets to the emotions of the matter, they intentionally were metame the Kohen to make sure that everyone understood he's going to go to the mikvah and do the Para Aduma right away as a Tvul Yom, while he still has a semi-status of Tuma. And in order to prevent the Kohanim who were doing the Avoda from being Mizalzel, they made sure that all the Kalim that they were using were not Makabel Tuma, just to make sure that we weren't exacerbating the problem, and we were simply proving our point to the Tzdukim. Of course, Tosfos here, the third Dibur HaMaskil, Lahoti Miliban Shal Tzdukim, writes, Lav Betuma Deoraisa Metamula, Delo Havu Mezalzeleba Kulehai. Of course, we're not talking about Tuma Deoraisa, we're only talking about Tuma Derabana. So that is why the Gemara says that he was put in this room called the Klei Avanim. Why was it called Klei Avanim? Because they made all of the Kalim for Para Aduma, Kalim that were not able to be Makabel Tuma, so that they could then prove to the Tzdukim by being Metamed Kol Midar Rabbanan that in fact we hold that a Tvul Yom can bring the Para Aduma. Halfway down, Beis Amud Aleph, says the Gemara, Ma'ishna Tzfona Mizracha. Why does the Mishnah reference the northeast side of the Mikdash, that this room is on the northeast side? So two features. Kevan the chatasi v'chatas unat zafon, because by a chatas, right, the animal is called, we refer to this animal as the chatas, the mechatas. So because it has an element of chatas, v'chatas unat zafon, it has to be on the north side. And uksiv el nochach panei ol moed takinu l'rabbanan lishkat tzfona mizracha ki heche delehabu lehakera. So that there is going to be some type of heker, that this is specifically for Para Aduma. So that's why this room was located in that space, that it was a mix of east and north features to make sure that we knew that it was a chatas. 2/3 of the way down, my bira, it says in the Mishnah that was quoted in our Gemara, this Mishnah can be found in Maseches Para Paragimel. It quoted there that it has to be in the bira. What my bira? What does that mean? That's the machlokas in the Amoraim. Amar Rabba Bar Barchan, Amar Rav Yochanan, Makom Haya Behar Habayis Ubira Shmo. There was a part of the Mikdash that was referred to as Bira. However, dissenting opinion, Bereish Lakish Amar Kol HaMikdash Kulo Karui Bira Shneimar HaBira Asher Hachinosi, a reference to the whole place. Either way, the word Bira is a reference to this place that the Kohen would go, either a specific part of the Mikdash or the whole plot of land that was the Mikdash itself, either way. So it asks the Gemara, 15 lines or so from the bottom, Minahani Mili. Whenever we see Minahani Mili, we have to have some context. We don't have any context from the Gemara. We don't know exactly what it's asking. So take a look at Rashi. Rashi is about 10 lines from the bottom of the Rashis. Dibur HaMaskil Minahani Mili. Asks the Gemara, so the Gemara wants to know, you told me in our Mishnah that we have to separate the coin for 7 days. Then when our Gemara opened, you quoted a Mishnah from Para that the coin that's going to do the avoda for the Para Duma also has to be nifresh for 7 days. He has to separate out for 7 days. How do you know that? Amar Rav Minyumi bar Chilkia, Amar Rav Mechasya bar Idi, Amar Rav Yochanan, Amar Kra. The pasuk says as follows: Kasher asa bayom hazeh tziva Hashem la'asos lechaper alechem. What's the drush on this pasuk? La'asos. When the pasuk says la'asos, elu ma'aseh para. That is a reference to the Maisa Para, to the Para Duma, to the Avodah you'll do there. Lechaper. What does it mean when it says lechaper? It says the Gemara, Elu Maisa Yom Kippurim. So we see that one pasuk speaks about both things, about Para Duma and about Yom Kippur, and we assume that they have the same exact din. And the same exact din would be that they both have to be nifrash, they both have to be separated for 7 days prior to their Avodah. So the Gemara is now going to ask a whole Amud's worth of questions. Michael, we're going to go to the top of Gimel Amud Aleph. And the Gemara starts as follows: Bishlama kule kra v'parala metukam. You can't say that this whole pasuk is talking about para aduma. Why not? Because lechaper ksiv. Because the pasuk speaks about kapara. And while it's true that the para aduma can give you tahara, but it doesn't give you kapara. So if the pasuk says lechaper, it's pashat that the whole pasuk cannot be speaking about para aduma, because upara la bas kapara, because it doesn't give you kapara. Again, it gives you tara, it doesn't give you kapara. So we understand that the whole pasuk cannot be about para. However, Ella, maybe we should say ema kule krabi yom kippurim ksiv. Maybe we should say that the whole pasuk is speaking about Yom Kippur, and really there is no din by para to say that he should separate for 7 days. Kasha in the Gemara's presentation, because the Gemara presents from the Mishnah and Para that you have 7-day preparation phase for that Kohen who's doing the avodah of the Para Duma. Answers the Gemara, Amre Yalif Tziva Tziva. You're asking a good question, and I'm not going to answer you by rejecting your question. I'm going to answer your question by saying that really there's a Gzeras Hakasuv, that we have a Gzera Shava, excuse me. We have a Gzera Shava that reads as follows: 4 lines from the bottom, Beis Medalef. Sivhacha Tziva Hashem Lasos. 2 psukim. One, the pasuk we saw above, and another one that says Zos chukas Torah asher tziva Hashem lemor. We see the word tziva in both places. What is the drasha? What is the gzera shava from these 2 psukim? Says the Gemara 2 lines from the bottom, Alahalan para avkan para. Just like in the Zos chukas Torah pasuk, there's a reference to the para duma. So too by our pasuk, the word tziva is the bridge. We learn from over there where it's talking about para. It brings it back to our pasuk of tziva, which teaches us that our pasuk is also talking about para, in which case the 7-day preparation period applies both to Yom Kippur and to para. And that's part 1 of the drasha. Umakan prisha, aflahalan prisha. So we're learning from pasuk number 2 of Zos chukas Torah that that's talking about para duma. The word siva brings that word back to our camp of prisha, and we know that just like by Yom Kippur there's 7 days of prisha, so too by para duma. End of the first page. Aflahalan prisha. Beautiful. So the Gemara presents the gzera shava as stated. Says the Gemara, but wait a minute. I could find you another pasuk that has nothing to do with para that also has the word siva. Right? Really, what we're doing is we're testing the limits of how do you develop a gzera shava. Is it random? Every time you see the word siva and siva, you could put them together and learn things from one another? Says the Gemara, let's test the system. The Ema, maybe we should say top of Beis and Beis, the Ema, tziva tziva the Yom Kippurim, another pasuk by Yom Kippur, the pasuk writes, Vayaska, Asher tziva Hashem es Moshe. We see by a pasuk that speaks about Yom Kippur the word tziva. So why did you make your gzera shava to say that tziva by the pasuk that we started with by Yom Kippur is also tziva by par? No, maybe there's 2 psukim that talk about Yom Kippur and they both say tziva. So maybe we should have said that there is no gzera shava. So answers the Gemara, yes. Answers the Gemara, you're not allowed to make the gzera shava that you just recommended. Why? A subtle answer, says the Gemara, done in siva delifnei asiya, mitziva delifnei asiya. We're allowed to make a gzera shava with the word siva as long as they're positioned in the same place before the word asiya. So that's what we have. Tziva delifnei asiya. If you look in the psukim at the bottom of the page that we saw earlier where the gzera shava is presented, the first pasuk says, it says tziva Hashem lasos, tziva comes before asiya. Second pasuk also that we saw on the bottom, tziva is before asiya. But the pasuk that you tried to answer from the top, all right, the Gemara says, oh, look at the second line. It says, Vayas kasher tziva. So what comes first? The ya'as does. So it says the Gemara, no, The order of Tziva and Vayas in the Psukim is incorrect according to this new recommendation. You wanted to say that the Gzeira Shava should have been with the pasuk on the second line, Vayas Kasher Tziva, but then Yas came before Tziva. That's not consistent. So that's what the Gemara is answering here. No. Done in Tziva delifnei Asiya, mitziva delifnei Asiya. We can do the Gzeira Shava when the position of the word Siva relative to Asiya is the same, which in this case is before. The ain done in Siva dile achar Asiya, mitziva delifnei Asiya. But if you have a pasuk that has two words, Vayas and Siva, so then we need the order of Siva and Vayas to be the same, Siva Vayas and Siva Vayas. But if you have Siva Vayas and then the next pasuk is Vayas Siva, that's out of order, and therefore says the Gemara, you're not allowed to make that Gzeira Shava. So we've learned an important idea quoted by the Gemara, that when we make a Gzeira Shava, and there are other common words in each pasuk, the order of those words have to be the same in both Gzeira Shavas. Then the Gemara tests the system of Gzeira Shava again. Well, wait a minute. We have another example where there is the word Siva that's used unrelated to Para. Maybe we should say there's no Gzeira Shava between Yom Kippur and Par, because maybe the Gzeira Shava is between Yom Kippur and Korbanos. What does the pasuk say there? The pasuk reads, "Dichsi," fifth, sixth line, Daf Beis Amud Beis, "Dichsi bayom savoso es bnei Yisrael." The pasuk there says savoso. So it says the Gemara, that's not the same word. Done in Siva mitziva, ve'ein done in Siva, ve'ein done in savoso mitziva. Look at the pasuk; the words are not the same. So I'm not going to make a Gzeira Shava when one pasuk says Siva and the other says savoso. Asks the Gemara, why not? We do that all the time. Asks the Gemara, and this is the example in Shas of Gzeira Shavas that have different words, and we make a Gzeira Shava. Says Gemara, my nafkamina, who cares if it's Siva and Savoso? We should still be able to make a Gzeira Shava. Why? Because V'atana debate Rabbi Shmuel, V'shava kohen uva kohen, zohi shiva, zohi via. You're entering the house. One time we said shav, one time we said ba. We treat them the same. They're not even the same word. Not the same shoresh, not the same word. You're concerned that Siva and Savoso are different? The precedence is much greater than your problem. The precedence is ba and shav. Those words aren't even the same words when we make a Gzeira Shava. Pashut, you can use Siva and Savoso. So then the Gemara responds, no, you cannot. When do we say shav and ba that we have to make a Gzeira Shava? That's when there's no other two psukim to make the Gzeira Shava. Because here we have Siva and Siva, therefore we're not going to use Siva and Savoso. So you wanted to say maybe the Gzeira Shava should be Yom Kippur to Korbanos. No, not going to be Yom Kippur to Korbanos, because we have other psukim that we can use that match the word perfectly. Siva, Siva. You want to ask Shav, Ba? Not a good argument. Over there, we didn't have a choice. Here we have a choice. We have other psukim that say Siva and Siva. So it says the Gemara, now that we've proven ourselves, let's go back to the pasuk that we started with. The pasuk that we started with on Beis Amud Aleph, where we said Mino Hanimili about 10 lines from the bottom. The pasuk read, Kasher asa bayom hazeh tziva Hashem la'asos lechaper alechem. And the drasha that we said by lechaper was Ma'aseh Yom HaKippurim. So it says the Gemara as follows: lechaper, we're 1/3 of the way down on Beis Amud Beis. Lechaper elu Ma'aseh Yom HaKippurim. That's what it means. Ve'ema kapara de korbanos. Maybe the word kapara in that pasuk speaks about korbanos. Lav dafka Yom Kippur. A lot of korbanos bring about kapara. So lav dafka, we should say that it's only talking about Yom HaKippurim. It says the Gemara, if that's true, ve'ema kapara de korbanos. If you want to say that maybe when the pasuk said lechaper, it wasn't talking about Yom Kippur bichlal, but talking about korbanos in general. Says the Gemara, mi adinan hai kohen misrame devoy leprisha. That can't be, because I don't know who the Kohen will be next week. If today's Tuesday, the next Tuesday, I don't know who the Kohen's gonna be, because he hasn't been chosen yet, because everything was done b'pais, everything was done as a lottery. So I can't be mafresh that Kohen. So says the Gemara, so what? Amre, that's not a good argument, because alama loni baile prisha lekuli mishmeres beis av. We saw this language in Maseches Shkalim of beis av. Okay, you don't know which Kohen it is? Separate the whole group of Kohanim. Who cares? One of them is going to do the avoda. Separate them. What do we care if it's the whole group? Says the Gemara, no, that's not a good plan. Danin davar shekavua lozman midavar shekavua lozman lafuke korbanos tekol yom isnu. We're trying to compare Yom Kippur and Para Aduma to each other, because those things have a kavua zman. They're not every single day. Korbanos are every single day. Says the Gemara, fine, but I have another precedent that we have kapara. Ve'ema regalim. Maybe we should say the shalosh regalim. So says the Gemara, that's also not a good idea. Don and davar shenoig pam achas b'shana. We want to learn from the world of Yom Kippur or Para Aduma, which happened once a year. Mi davar hanoig pam achas b'shana, to something else. But lafuke regalim de lapa machas b'shana ninu. However, there's shalosh regalim. So because there's shalosh regalim, you can't say that Yom Kippur and Para Aduma, one of them is similar to Korbanos because or to the regalim, because the regalim, there's three of them. And because there's three regalim, so therefore, says the Gemara, you can't compare, and that can't be pshat in the pasuk. Ask the Gemara 2/3 of the way down, 3 lines before the wide lines. Ve'ema regel echad. Okay, fine. But Pesach only happens once a year. Sukkot only happens once a year. Fine. Don't talk about the shalosh regalim. Speak about one of the regalim, and then it is comparable to Yom Kippur and Para Aduma. Ve'ema regel echad. V'chitema lo yadin and haiminaihu. Oh. But there's three. How do I know which one to choose of the three regalim to say that I'm only going to focus on one? That's not a hard question to answer. I can give you 2 different approaches. Maybe we'll always choose Pesach because it's always listed first in the list. Chag HaMatzos, that's always going to be listed first. Or I can argue differently that maybe we should say it's Chag HaSukkos because because there are more mitzvos on that Chag than on a lot of Chagim. So it says the Gemara, if that's true, then maybe we really have a case which is similar to Yom Kippur and Para Aduma, which is any one of the shalosh regalim. Says the Gemara, we can't do that either. First of the long lines, Beis and Beis, Eladan and Prishat Shiva liyom echad, mi Prishat Shiva liyom echad. We have to compare something that has 7 days of separation, followed by 1 day of avoda. However, ve'ein done in Prishat Shiva l'Shiva, mi Prishat Shiva l'echad. But the problem is that if you say we're only talking about one holiday, but there's 7 days of Pesach, that doesn't work. So you can't compare a case of 7 days of no holiday that leads up to Yom Kippur, 7 days of no holiday that leads up to the Para Aduma, versus what? 7 days of Pesach that lead up to the 8th day of Pesach. It doesn't work. It doesn't make any sense. Rosh Hashanah is not considered one of the Shalosh Regalim, though. Yeah, it's an exception. It's a regular Yontif, as it were, but it's not technically one of the Shalosh Regalim. That's a great question, but the Gemara doesn't even entertain that. I don't know why the Gemara doesn't entertain it. Maybe it treats it like a regular, regular malacha day. Good question. I don't know why the Gemara doesn't entertain that, but it doesn't. And we're gonna focus on one right now, which makes your question even stronger, Kevin. The Ema Shmini. Maybe we should have said Shmini Atzeres Deprishas Shiva Liyom Echadu. Of course, we know that there are opinions that write that Shmini Atzeres is a Chag Bifnei Atzmo. We look at it as the second days, as it were, of the holiday, but really it's not. Really, Shmini Atzeres is its own holiday. So if that's the case, then we do have 7 days that lead up to 1 day of Avoda, which is similar to Yom Kippur and to Para Aduma. So says the Gemara, that doesn't work either. Done in Davar, we're 6-7 lines from the bottom. Done in Davar she'ein kedusha lafanav, midavar she'ein kedusha lafanav. We have to compare something like Para Aduma, where the 7 days prior to the Para Aduma were not days of Kedusha, were not days of Isser Malacha. The 7 days prior to Yom Kippur were not days of Malacha. So we need to compare those two because the 7 days prior to each of those episodes had no Kedusha to them. The Ein Danin, says the Gemara, Davar Sheish Kedusha Lafanav, Mi Davar She'ein Kedusha Lafanav. But in the 7 days that are prior to Shmini Atzeres, all of those days have Kedusha. They all have a sense of Isser Malacha. Even Chol HaMoed has an Isser Malacha. Barry Robinson just recently spoke about this, the halacha. These are complicated sugyas. Halachos of Chol HaMoed are very difficult, but could be extremely severe, so one should know them well. So says the Gemara, but we can't compare the case of Shmini Atzeres to Para Aduma and Yom Kippur. Shmini Atzeres, the days that lead up to Shmini Atzeres are kadosh. The days that lead up to Yom Kippur and Para Aduma are not kadosh. So that doesn't work either, says the Gemara. But wait a minute, 4 lines from the bottom. V'lav kal v'chomer. That's ridiculous. Of course that should work. That should be a kal v'chomer. What's the kal v'chomer? So says the Gemara, Hashta davar she'ein kedusha lefanav boy prisha. Now that you have something that has no kedusha before it, there's no kedusha to the days that are prior to Yom Kippur. There's no kedusha to the days that are prior to Para Aduma. And yet we see that boy prisha, the Kohen has to separate before Yom Kippur, and the Kohen has to separate before the Para Aduma. All the more so, davar sheish kedusha lefanav lo kol shekain. Then by Shmini Atzeres, all the more so he needs to separate himself. Though this have kedusha, alachas kama v'kama. So the Gemara answers, just drops the gavel. The Gemara says, stop asking this line of questioning. Amar Rav Mesharshia, lo, hazeksiv kazeh. You're right, your kal v'chomer is logical. It makes sense to say that just like by Yom Kippur, where there's no Kedusha days prior, the Kohen has to be nifresh from his family, then if the days before have Kedusha, all the more so, says the Gemara, you're right. In principle, you're right. But the Pasuk says hazeh, and we darshan it kazeh. It can't be different than the model. What's the prototype? Yom Kippur. The 7 days prior have no Kedusha. That's what needs to be made similar to Yom Kippur. So that's Paraduma, which had 7 days prior with no Kedusha. Shmini Atzeres. You're right, Al Tzvara and Kal V'chomer, but you're wrong because the Pasuk just ends the conversation. This is the drasha, Hazeh, Ksiv, Kazeh. So therefore it has to be very similar, and therefore we exclude Shmini Atzeres as one of the possibilities. 2 lines from the bottom, Beis Mid Beis. Rav Ashi Amar, he gives a second answer. It's not because of the Gzeres HaKazav of Hazeh and Kazeh. Rav Ashi Amar, Mi'ika Midi, the Iker Regel, Lo Bai Prisha, Kafel Di Day, Bai Prisha. How can it be that the Iker Regel, the primary days of Sukkot, they don't require Prisha, but Shmini Atzeres at the tail end, that one requires Prisha? Rav Ashi says that's not even possible. Even according to those who say that Shmini Atzeres is its own chag and it's really completely separate. So then says the Gemara, Hani Mili, as we turn to the top of Gimel and Aleph, Hani Mili le'inyan Pazar Kashav, an acronym the Gemara references, and these the Pazar Kashav stands for, I wrote it on the side of my Gemara, Pais, Zman, Regel, Korban, Shiur, and a Bracha. So these are all differences by Shmini Atzeres. For example, the most famous of them is that we say Shechianu on that night. On the second days of Pesach, we don't say Anu Shechianu. The Chag's already started. We made our Shechianu many days ago. So we in Chutz La'aretz say 2 Shechianus, night 1, night 2. And they only say 1 night. Second days of Yom Tov, no way, absolutely not. Masha'en came with Shmini Atzeres. It's a regel b'fnei atzmo. So we make a new. That's why it's always so confusing. If you're not like holding in the sugya, I forget every year. Shmini Atzeres. Wait a minute. Do we make the Shechianu or not? We forget. It's a regel b'fnei atzmo. So Pazar Kashav is the 6 differences. So even says the Gemara, even if we want to say it's a regel b'fnei atzmo, but avalinian tashlumin derishonu. However, and this is like the nail in the coffin to reject the Shmini Atzeres model. What happens if you forgot to bring your korban on the first days of Sukkot? Can you bring a tashlumin on Shmini Atzeres for what you forgot on Sukkot? Says the Gemara. Absolutely, you can. Avalinian tashlumin derishonu. The Hatnan, the Mishnah writes, Mishelo chag b'yom tov harishon shel chag. If someone did not bring their korban chagiga on the first days of Sukkot, what's the halacha? Chogeg v'holech. You can bring your korban chagiga until when? Kol haregel kulo v'yom tov ha'acharon shel chag. Even if it's going to be on Shmini Atzeres. So even if you hold in general that Shmini Atzeres is separate of Sukkot, but if le'inyan tashlumin it's not, and says the Gemara, therefore it's not separate enough to generate a distinction whereby we can compare Shmini Atzeres to Yom Kippur and to Paraduma. Therefore, the Gemara concludes, and we'll stop right here. Therefore, the Gemara concludes, so far, we'll see more questions tomorrow, but the Gemara concludes that Yom Kippur and Paraduma are the only 2 areas of halacha where we require a hafrasha of the Kohen from his family 7 days prior. We'll pick up right here tomorrow on Gimel Amud Aleph, 4 lines down. Wishing you all a beautiful night.